Hello everybody! Today we're going to be talking all about the movie Wish, which is going to be debuting on Disney Plus tomorrow. What we're going to do is we're going to go through and take a look at every single hidden reference that I could find about all the past 100 Disney movies. Now, in honor of the Disney 100 celebration, Disney decided to pay tribute to almost every single one of their previous films inside of this film. So let's go take a look at every single one. Obviously, spoiler alerts ahead. The very first thing that we see on the screen is the title sequence, which says a Walt Disney feature production. If you take a look at the lettering of a Walt Disney feature production and the background, it's an almost exact replica of a Walt Disney feature production logo that is found at the start of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Right after that, we get into the storybook, much like most other films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or Pinocchio, or Cinderella, or Robin Hood, or so many other films. This entire thing starts off with a picture of a storybook, which will open up and tell us the entire story. Obviously, this time around, we are going to read the story about Wish. Now, when we get to our first shot of Rosa's, we start to go over all of the different houses, and if you take a look at that, you can actually realize that a lot of the houses look similar to the houses that can be found, or the cottage that can be found in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. However, if you take a look at the bottom part of the screen, you will see a deer there, and I know what you're thinking, it kind of looks like Bambi. It does kind of look like Bambi because it's actually a shot from Bambi. In fact, if you go back and look at several other Disney films throughout the years, you may realize that this deer shot can actually be found in several other films, including things like the very opening shot of Beauty and the Beast. Then when we get a look at the Kingdom of Roses, some of it may look familiar because there's inspirations from so many different Disney films here, including Tangled, obviously, if you take a look at the tower in the background. But if you take a look at the plant work, it is actually all inspired by Sleeping Beauty's plant work that can be found throughout the entire film. Now, Asha is actually going to take us into the Kingdom of Roses with a fancy song, and while she's there, she goes past two kids that are sitting in a rocket ship. If you take a look at the back here, you can find a moon and stars. If this looks familiar, then you're probably thinking about Fantasia, because this is actually a tribute to the Sorcerer's Apprentice hat that can be found that Mickey Mouse is wearing. As we continue going through the town, we eventually get to a puppet show. The puppet show theater and background is somewhat similar to Kloppin's background that can be found in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the 1996 film. After a little bit, we actually see Valentino and Asha blow a dandelion where it goes off into the Great White Somewhere, aka just like Belle did back in Beauty and the Beast. When we get to Asha's friends, you might realize that Asha's friends may seem familiar to you in some way, shape, or form. That is because they are supposed to represent the Seven Dwarfs. Not only that, they all have the same characteristics of the Seven Dwarfs, and all of their letters of their name actually start off with the same letters of the dwarfs. So Dahlia is D for Doc, Bazima is bashful, or B, Gabo is grumpy, aka G, Hal is happy, Simon is sleepy, Dario is dopey, and Safi is sneezy. Now, in addition to this, if you look in the background while Asha is talking to Dahlia, you might see the 7 mugs in the background. All of them have a different letter on them, starting off on the left-hand side with B and going all the way down to D for Dahlia. This will also be the first time that you can get a closer look at Asha's dress, and if you take a look all around it, you can find these little seeds here. These are actually supposed to be pumpkin seeds representing Cinderella, or more importantly, the fairy godmother. That's going to become more important as we go on through our story here. Eventually, we get to Asha's interview with Magnifico. Now, Magnifico, of course, with the name Magnifico, sounds kind of sinister, and that's because it's actually inspired by Maleficent's name. It's supposed to be a similar thing. If you take a look at the evil book that is found in his office, you will see a dragon going around it along with thorns. This is also supposed to represent Maleficent, who turns into a dragon and has the thorns in the film. Asha explains to Magnifico that she has a love of drawing, and she goes through and shows him a little flip book, or her notebook, and on the side you can go through and see some animation, much like the animation found back in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and even up to today with the movie Wish. The film creators actually poked fun at 2D animation by even having Magnifico point out, is that a talent? Also in the book, we can find a picture of Asha along with her father looking up at the stars. This is a clear nod to the 1994 film The Lion King, where both Simba and Mufasa look up at the stars where the great kings of the past look down upon us. When we get to the wish chamber, you can find all of the different wishes up in the air. According to the filmmakers, there are 1,923 wishes up here, representing the year 1923 when the Walt Disney Company was founded. While we're going through, we can see a few of the wishes at different points of the film. We'll talk about the ones that we can see in this scene specifically. First off, we have a lady who is going through and making a beautiful dress. This is actually the exact same dress that Sleeping Beauty wore in the movie Sleeping Beauty. Then when we go through and we see the table that Magnifico has, if you take a look at the bottom left corner, there's a potion there that might look familiar. That's because it is a similar color and a similar bottle as Yzma's potions in the Emperor's New Groove. When we get to the wish ceremony, we see the same lady who wanted to be a seamstress there, and you can see a ribbon being cut along the way. Now, this ribbon is supposed to represent both Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty for both of their seamstress scenes in the films. Eventually, we get to the song The Wish, and at the end of it, we see Asha making a wish upon a star, much like Geppetto or Tiana or so many different Disney characters have done throughout all of the years. Right after the star comes alive, we get to a wishing well. The wishing well is supposed to represent the same wishing well that Snow White sang at the start of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When we get to the scene where all of the characters that should not be able to talk start to talk, like the mushrooms, we see a group of mushrooms which are supposed to represent two different films, one of them being Alice in Wonderland, and the other one being Frozen, because the mushrooms right away say, "We love crazy," much like Han says, "I love crazy." When we get to the porcupine, the squirrel, and the rabbit starts to thump his thumper onto the ground, much like Thumper from the film Bambi. Also, we have the same squirrel goes up and starts to talk to Asha. If her movements look familiar, they should, because she's actually representing the squirrel that falls in love with Merlin in The Sword and the Stone. When all the different butterflies appear behind Asha during the segment You're a Star, they may look familiar to you as well. These are the same butterflies that can be found in the film Encanto. While going down the river, you can see a turtle there with a lily pad on his head, much like the turtle that goes down the river with a lily pad on his head in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. At the end of the entire song, You're a Star, two of the animals look at each other and start to talk. One of them is a deer, one of them is a bear, and the deer says to the bear, "Thanks for not eating me, John." He says, "No problem, Bambi." Obviously, Bambi being a reference to the film Bambi, and I believe because the bear is named John, it might be a reference to Little John from Robin Hood. When we get to the scene with the chickens, you can see that Valentino has a few buckets that are placed on his head as he struggles to get on them. The animation is very similar to when Mowgli puts the buckets on his head at the end of the Jungle Book. When Star starts to have it so different things come to life inside of Magnifico's office, one of the things that comes to life is a pen which starts to draw a hidden Mickey on the table. We eventually get back to the wishes with Star and Asha, and one of them might seem a little familiar to you, and I believe it's a reference to the 2002 film Treasure Planet when they go by the floating whales, much like this person is floating through the air like Jim Hawkins and Long John Silver. When Magnifico starts to sing his individual song, we start to get a glimpse into the possibility that maybe this guy is not a good dude. In fact, there's a lot of different representation of him with mirrors, which is going to come into more and more play as we get later on, but this is supposed to kind of represent the idea of him and the evil queen from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, being similar, of course, with her love of mirrors with "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" During his song, he also goes by a bunch of knights in shining armor. These knights in shining armor are actually duplicates of the knights from the movie Frozen. Magnifico eventually opens up his secret lair, which is supposed to represent the secret lair of the evil queen from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, with a similar staircase going down. When we get back to Asha's house, Star has a cup fall on his head. It's actually a small little teacup with a chip in it, obviously a reference to Chip from the 1991 film Beauty and the Beast. While Saba is talking to Asha inside of the same cottage scene, you can actually find a few different plates on the back of it. One of them is a little bit darker, however, if you take a close look at it, it's actually the exact same design as the Heart of Tafiti from Moana. As Asha and her family go across the river, it's a very similar style of boat to the one that Rapunzel and Flynn Rider rode inside the film Tangled. In addition to that, if you take a look from that viewpoint towards the City of Roses, you can see that the entire landscape of the town is very similar to the city of Corona from Tangled as well. When we get back over to Magnifico's secret lair, you can find several different references, again referencing the evil queen from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, including on his table you can find a apple with green painting on it, much like the evil apple or the poisonous apple that is found in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. On top of that, if you take a look at the desk, you can find a half skull, much like the half skull that can be found in the evil queen's lair in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And then if you take a look at the background of his table in a different scene when the queen shows up, you can see a little machine that is similar to a machine that Maurice has in his workshop in Beauty and the Beast. Eventually we get to the town where we have the meeting being called to try to figure out where Asha is, and you can find all of these different wanted posters scattered throughout with Asha's face on it. All of these wanted posters are very similar to the same wanted posters that can be found in Tangled for Flynn Rider. In addition to that, when we see Asha in this scene, it is our first glimpse of her hood, and the hood is very similar to the hood of the fairy godmother from Cinderella. Eventually, Magnifico shows up and has two massive hands come out from smoke. The two hands are supposed to represent Ursula's hands, which retrieve Ariel's voice in The Little Mermaid. The entire transformation of Simon receiving his wish is very similar to the Beast receiving his human form in Beauty and the Beast, where he is actually lifted up above the ground and then has a little swirly action going around until he's transformed into his new role, much like the Beast is transformed into his new body, his old body. When we get back into Magnifico's secret lair, he begins to destroy different people's wishes. The first one we see is actually Peter Pan flying over the moon, where he crushes it and says, "This will never land," a reference to, obviously, Peter Pan. The next one he goes to, he says, "A perfect nanny for your horrible children. Popping this one," obviously a reference to the 1964 classic film Mary Poppins. And the final one, he says, "True love, how sweet." Obviously, true love being a reference to, well, pretty much any Disney film that has a romance at the center of it. We get to the forest where we have Star create a magic wand for Asha, and as you can see in this picture, there is pretty much her whole transformation into the fairy godmother role has taken place at this point, with the hood and the magic wand there. Eventually we get back into Magnifico's secret lair, but now we have different characters that are found there. As they go through the book, they can find the transformation of Magnifico in book form, and if you take a look at the image on the screen, it looks very similar to Maleficent as she reaches up into the heavens to destroy Sleeping Beauty, which she never did. Spoiler alert. We eventually get to a chase scene in the forest between Magnifico, or is it, and Asha. The very first thing that we see is when he approaches her in the bushes, you can actually see in the background of Asha a weeping willow tree with a face on it, much like the weeping willow tree that has a name in Pocahontas, that is Grandmother Willow. As she begins to escape him, she actually jumps into a minecart, another reference to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and she transforms that minecart into having legs so she can climb up a hill, much like some of the inanimate objects that come to life in Beauty and the Beast. We eventually get back to another scene of Asha's family rowing away from the village, and again it is very similar look to Flynn Rider and Rapunzel found on a rowboat with the village in the background. When we get to the final showdown in the village, we see Magnifico call out "Mirror, mirrors on the wall." This is actually a lot more similar to the misquoted line of "Mirror, mirror on the wall" from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, when in reality in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs it is "Magic mirror on the wall," but now we actually have canon of a Disney film that says "Mirror, mirrors on the wall." When Magnifico is defeated at the end of the film, he is taken into his scepter, and while he is going in there, there's actually a flash of a character that appears on screen, and that character is none other than the actual magic mirror from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. After everything is reclaimed and all is good in the world, we get back to the village where the queen is talking to a person who looks very similar to Peter Pan. In fact, his name is Peter, and she wants to have it so he can teach another person how to fly. We then get to where Asha and Valentino are talking to each other in the town, where Valentino says, "I dream of a utopian metropolis where all mammals are equal and wear clothes." This is a reference to the 2016 film Zootopia, where all animals were equal and they wore clothes. Our final transformation of Asha becoming the fairy godmother has two parts to it. First off, we see Star create a magic wand for Asha, and it looks almost exactly the same as the fairy godmother's wand in Cinderella. And then we also see this really cool transformation scene of her becoming the fairy godmother. All of her clothes stay the same, however, her entire look and all of her movements are the exact same look and movements of Cinderella when she gets her brand new dress in the film. Just before we go to the credits, we have fireworks in the sky. 3 of the fireworks actually make a hidden Mickey. This is just the second hidden Mickey that we've talked about out of several that I found throughout the film. However, maybe we can do that in a different film as well, going into more details about the hidden Mickeys. The end credits feature several different constellations from several different Disney films. Not all of them are represented there. Not all the animated ones are represented there, I should say. They start off with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Pinocchio and make their way all the way up to Strange World, with Splat being one of the last characters that can be found on the screen. Our final scene of the entire film takes place after the credits, where we see Saba playing a musical instrument on a hill, and the song he plays is When You Wish Upon a Star. And that's going to conclude our look at all the different references I found in the movie Wish over my first few viewings. Let me know in the comments, is there anything that I missed? I'm sure there is, so let me know where I can find different things so I can go back and watch Wish again and try to find a few more references. As always, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, make sure you subscribe, and we will see you once again tomorrow. Oh yeah.